November 28th, 1981. The air off Catalina Island was cold, sharp, and strangely still, like the pause before a scream. The yacht Splendor drifted quietly over the black water, its lights trembling on the surface. That was the night Natalie Wood, one of Hollywood's most luminous stars, vanished into the darkness. When dawn broke, her body was found gently floating near the shore, still wrapped in a thin nightgown and a crimson coat, the color of blood against the sea's gray silence. The first report called it an accident. They said she had slipped while trying to secure the small dinghy. Valiant. But the bruises on her arms and legs, the scratches along her neck, and the deep fear of water that had haunted her all her life told another story. Natalie never went near the ocean willingly. Everyone knew that. So how could she end up in the water? Alone. On a freezing November night, friends whispered that her husband, actor Robert Wagner, had a temper one that flared in jealousy. Captain Dennis Davern later recalled the sound of a shattered wine bottle, the tension in the air, and then silence. The kind of silence that only exists right after something irreversible happens. For decades, the case was closed and reopened, the evidence shifting like the tide. Witnesses claimed they had heard a woman screaming for help, followed by a man's calm voice saying, "Okay, honey, well, get you." But no one came. No engine started. Only the waves kept moving. 40 years passed, and the truth stayed buried beneath the same water that had taken her life until now. At 95, Robert Wagner finally spoke. In a fragile voice, he said, "That night, there are many things I wish I could change." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't denial. It was the weary echo of a man who has lived too long with ghosts. Was it a tragic accident, a crime born of jealousy, or simply fate? Cruel and unexplainable? Tonight. Well, trace the events of that weekend from the laughter on deck to the argument, to the last moment Natalie was seen alive. Not to judge, not to accuse, but to listen to the story the ocean still refuses to give up. A star who feared the sea, a husband haunted by silence, and a night that Hollywood will never forget. It began as a perfect Hollywood weekend, one that promised laughter, champagne, and calm waves. On November 27th, 1981, Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner invited two close companions aboard Splendor, actor Christopher Walken, her co-star in Brainstorm, and Captain Dennis Davern. The yacht, anchored off Catalina Island, sparkled under the sunset like a promise of peace after years of turbulence in Natalie and Robert's marriage. To the world, they were still the picture of glamour, but behind the polished smiles lingered shadows. Their love story, one of Hollywood's most celebrated, had weathered divorces, reconciliations, and years of hidden tension. Wagner, now older, quieter, still carried the insecurities that had once driven them apart. And as Natalie prepared for her cinematic comeback, rumors of chemistry between her and the younger, magnetic Christopher Walken began to feed those insecurities once more. The day aboard Splendor began lightheartedly. Wine glasses clinked, music played, and the group shared stories of old Hollywood. But as the night deepened, so did the undercurrents of jealousy. The sea grew rougher, the laughter thinner. The captain would later recall that after the second bottle of wine, a quiet unease began to fill the air like the calm before a storm. He said, Natalie, radiant yet restless, spent much of the evening speaking with Walken about her desire to focus on her career again. It was a conversation Wagner overheard and misunderstood. To him, it wasn't about work. It was about losing her, once again, to another man and to the world. By 10 p.m., the mood on deck had changed completely. The voices grew louder, the drinks stronger, and the ocean darker. In the cabin, a heated argument broke out. Davern remembered Wagner shouting, "Get off my damn boat!" before the sharp crack of breaking glass echoed through the night. What happened next has been told 100 different ways, but none with certainty. Some said Natalie went to her room in tears. Others believed she climbed to the deck alone, desperate for air. But one fact remains hauntingly clear. Natalie Wood was terrified of deep water. She had nearly drowned as a child and never learned to swim. So why would she go near the edge of the yacht? Later, Captain Davern would claim that Wagner refused to turn on the searchlights when Natalie disappeared. "Leave her there," Wagner allegedly said. "She'll come back when she cools down." But Natalie never did. Somewhere between anger and silence, between jealousy and regret, the woman who had once lit up the silver screen vanished into the sea. When dawn came, the ocean gave her back motionless, weightless, her eyes closed as if she had simply fallen asleep. It was the end of a night meant to celebrate friendship, and the beginning of a mystery that would haunt Hollywood for decades. The morning after Natalie's disappearance, Splendor floated quietly in the gray light, surrounded by search boats and whispers. At 7:45 a.m., the Coast Guard found her body less than a mile from shore. Her nightgown clung to her skin, her hair tangled with seaweed, her crimson coat heavy with salt water. Not far away drifted the dinghy, Valiant, its key still in the ignition, its oars untouched. It looked like a stage set hastily abandoned. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, the famed Los Angeles coroner, examined the body and found fresh bruises along her arms, wrists, and knees. Scratches traced her neck and cheek. Her blood alcohol level measured 0.14%, enough to blur her senses, but not enough to explain the bruising. These injuries, Noguchi wrote, occurred before she entered the water. So if it wasn't an accident, what truly happened on that yacht? Robert Wagner's version of events shifted like the tide. First, he claimed Natalie must have gone out to secure the dinghy. Then, he suggested she had taken it herself, perhaps trying to reach the shore after an argument. But for those who knew Natalie, that story made no sense. She feared the sea more than anything. Natalie wouldn't have gone near that water. Her sister Lana Wood later said, "Not in the dark. Not in her nightgown. Never." Witnesses from nearby boats began to come forward. A couple aboard a vessel called the Capricorn told police they had heard a woman screaming, "Help me, someone please help me," for nearly 15 minutes. The cries, they said, ended after a man's calm voice replied, "Okay, honey, we'll get you." Then nothing. No engine. No movement. Only the rhythm of waves against the hull. It was chilling testimony, but it went largely ignored. When Marilyn Wayne, one of the witnesses, insisted on coming forward again years later, she received an anonymous note slipped into her mailbox. "If you value your life, keep quiet." For the authorities, there were too many contradictions and too little proof. Wagner and Christopher Walken both maintained their silence. Captain Davern, the only man who spoke openly, admitted he had lied in his first statement. He said Wagner had forbidden him from turning on the searchlights or calling for help. "He told me to stay out of it." Davern later confessed, "And I did. I was afraid." In 1981, the case was closed as accidental drowning. But time has a way of resurfacing what men try to bury. 30 years later, in 2011, the investigation was reopened after Davern's confession. The Los Angeles County coroner amended Natalie Wood's death certificate from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. Wagner, then in his 80s, was officially named a person of interest. Yet, even as the world demanded answers. Wagner's response was silence. His lawyer called the accusations baseless. And Christopher Walken, who might have been the only other person to truly know what happened that night, refused to speak at all. Meanwhile, Natalie's sister Lana became the voice of the storm. She appeared on every major network, saying the words others were afraid to. "I believe Robert killed my sister." Her conviction came not from vengeance, but from disbelief. "My sister would never have gone into that water on her own," she said. "Someone put her there or let her die there." Hollywood, for all its glamour, had seen its share of scandals. But this one was different. This was a story where love and death, jealousy and silence, fame and fear, all merged into one haunting question that no investigation could ever answer. What really happened aboard Splendor that night? After Natalie's death, Robert Wagner became a ghost in his own life. The once charming actor, admired for his confidence and wit, seemed hollowed out, his eyes distant, his voice thin. To the press, he said little. To his friends, even less. Hollywood, ever hungry for scandal, had already chosen its narrative: the handsome husband, the jealous rage, the silent cover-up. But behind closed doors, Robert's life shrank to the size of his guilt. He sold the Splendor, left the coast, and withdrew from the world that had once adored him. When Natalie died, he wrote years later, "I thought my life ended, too." For decades, he carried that night like a wound that refused to close. In 2008, in his memoir Pieces of My Heart, Wagner broke his silence carefully, painfully, still guarded. He wrote of the argument that night, admitting that jealousy had gotten the better of him. "I was angry. Maybe I overreacted," he said. "But when she left the cabin, I thought she just needed time to cool off. Then she was gone." His words didn't clear his name. They only deepened the mystery. By 2018, police once again labeled him a person of interest, pointing out inconsistencies in his testimony and new witness reports, suggesting the bruises on Natalie's body were consistent with a struggle. Wagner, then 88, denied everything. It was an accident, his lawyer said. A terrible accident. But the public had grown weary of denial. For them, Wagner's silence was not grief, it was guilt. And yet, those who knew him intimately spoke of a different man, fragile, remorseful, haunted. His stepdaughter, Natasha Gregson Wagner, wrote in her memoir More Than Love that she believed in his innocence. "He loved my mother deeply," she said. "Whatever happened that night, it wasn't murder. It was tragedy." She described a man broken by memory. Every time he saw a photograph of Natalie, he would fall silent, his expression freezing as if time itself had stopped. "It's like he's still talking to her," she wrote. Every single day. To outsiders, Robert Wagner's story is one of suspicion and scandal. But to those closest to him, it was the story of a man trapped forever between love and loss, a man who may not have killed his wife, but was nonetheless destroyed by her death. In 2024, at 94, his health failing, Wagner agreed to a final recorded interview. His voice trembled, yet his words were steady, stripped of all performance. "People call me a monster, a liar, a coward," he said quietly. "But I was just a man in love who made mistakes, and I've paid for them every single day since." Not a confession, not an excuse, just an echo of a truth too painful to speak aloud. When the interview ended, Wagner stared out toward the Pacific, the same waters that had taken Natalie. "Sometimes," he murmured, "I think the sea knows everything. It just doesn't forgive." He died months later, And with him, perhaps, went the last fragments of the truth. Natalie Wood's death remains one of Hollywood's darkest mysteries, an unfinished story written in salt and silence. The waves have long since washed away the footprints on Catalina's shore. But the questions remain. Was it love? Was it rage? Was it an accident born of pride and pain? Only the ocean knows. Hollywood loves stories of passion and tragedy, but none quite like that of Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner. Theirs was a love story written in starlight and ended in darkness. It began with destiny, a girl of 10 pointing at a man 8 years her senior and whispering to her mother, "I am going to marry him." Years later, she did. In the 1,950 seconds, they were the golden couple of post-war America. Natalie radiant, expressive, the young woman whose eyes seemed to hold the entire sky, and Robert, the elegant leading man every director wanted. When they married in 1957, Hollywood called it a fairy tale come true. But behind the glamour, their marriage trembled under pressure. Fame magnified everything, their insecurities, their jealousies, their flaws. When Natalie's career eclipsed his, Wagner's pride began to ache. He loved her deeply, but fame became their third companion, a silent force always between them. In 1962, she filed for divorce, and the dream couple broke apart. But as if bound by fate, they found their way back to each other a decade later. Older, perhaps wiser, they remarried in 1972. For a while, it looked as though they had finally found peace. They laughed again. They raised their daughter, Courtney. They lived what appeared to be the happy ending the tabloids had promised. Yet, somewhere beneath the surface, old wounds waited. By 1981, as Natalie filmed Brainstorm with Christopher Walken, she was glowing again, her confidence returning. Her career reignited. But for Wagner, it stirred the same old ghosts. Friends noticed his growing unease. He adored her. One said, but he couldn't control his fear of losing her. That fear, perhaps, was what killed them both, one physically, the other spiritually. Natalie's death froze Wagner in time. For more than 40 years, he lived as a man divided, one half desperately clinging to love, the other suffocated by guilt. The ocean outside their home became both a mirror and a grave, reflecting everything he wished he could forget. When Robert Wagner passed away in 2025, headlines split in two. Some mourned a Hollywood legend, the dashing actor who defined an era. Others whispered the same old question, did he do it? But maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. Maybe he didn't push her, but didn't save her either. Maybe the real crime was silence, the silence of a man too proud, too afraid, or too broken to face what had done. Natalie Wood remains forever young in the public imagination, the shimmering star who danced through West Side Story, smiled through heartbreak, and vanished too soon. Her image, eyes bright, lips parted as if about to speak, still hangs in the collective memory of a generation. And Robert Wagner, he remains the man who loved her and lost her, living his final years under the weight of questions that no one could answer. Perhaps that's what makes their story endure. Not the scandal, not the mystery, but the human ache at its core. How love can lift us into light, and in one unguarded moment, drag us into darkness. On quiet nights, the waters off Catalina Island are said to whisper when the wind turns just right. Locals claim you can still hear the faint echo of a woman's voice calling for help and the sea. As always, answering with silence. That silence is where their story ends. Or perhaps, where it still lives. If you have stayed with us until this moment, you've walked through one of Hollywood's deepest shadows, the story of Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner. A story that begins with love and ends in mystery. A story that reminds us that behind every photograph, Behind every red carpet smile, there are wounds the spotlight can never heal. For some, Robert Wagner was a man consumed by jealousy. For others, he was simply a man broken by grief. But whichever you believe, the truth remains. 2 lives were destroyed that night, one by water, and one by guilt. Natalie's light never faded. Her films still shimmer, her laughter still echoes, and her eyes, those same dark, searching eyes, still look back at us from every frame, as if asking for something none of us can give, an answer. Perhaps that is the true curse of Hollywood, that fame can preserve beauty but never innocence. And when the curtain falls, the applause cannot drown out the ghosts that follow you home. So tell us, after hearing everything, what do you believe happened aboard Splendor that night? Was it an accident or a crime too carefully hidden beneath the waves? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this about the forgotten truths, the shattered hearts, and the secrets that time refuses to bury, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and ring the bell. Because sometimes, in the quiet between the waves and the stars, another untold story is still waiting to be heard.